Good morning. Welcome to day 4 of the Skills Festival. My name is Jenny Chapman. I'm the head of training at ADF Energy, and I'm also the workstream lead for the developers workstream within the Nuclear Skills Strategy Group. I'm delighted to introduce to you today our keynote speaker, Hazel Blears. Hazel is the lead on social value within the NDA, and she's been working with the NDA on developing their strategy. Hazel was previously an MP and has significant amount of experience in the social value area, and she co-authored the Social Value Act. Hazel's role within the NDA is providing advice on the social, economic and environmental impact and improving the impact for the decommissioning sites. Hazel will be sharing her thoughts and experience with you this morning, and I'm sure you'll get a lot from the presentation.
Hello everyone, I'm absolutely delighted to be here at the Nuclear Skills Festival and to have the opportunity to talk to all of you about some issues that I'm particularly passionate about. My name's Hazel Blears, and some of you will know that in the past I was a Member of Parliament for nearly 20 years, representing my home city of Salford in the northwest, and since I've left Parliament I've got involved with a whole range of different issues, and I'm now a really proud resident of Cumbria. And over the last few years, I've got to know a lot of the people in the nuclear industry, particularly in West Cumbria, but also on a wider basis. And what I found is that the people in the nuclear industry are absolutely amazing. They are creative, they're innovative, they're imaginative. Many of them are very impressive in their own technical fields, in science, in construction and engineering. But what they all have in common, whether they are in the civil nuclear industry or the defence industry, is that as well as wanting to do a really important mission for the country, they're absolutely passionate about the communities in which they operate. So as I was getting towards the end of my career in Parliament, my party was in opposition. I'm not very good at shouting at the other side. I'm a very constructive person and I like to get things done. So I teamed up on a cross-party basis with a Conservative Member of Parliament. He was very new and I had a bit of experience, and together we took a very small piece of legislation through Parliament as a private member's bill, and it was the Social Value Act in 2012. Now I like to think that that was a small piece of legislation, but enclosed within it was a really big idea. And the central thrust of that legislation was to try and shift us as a nation, both public and private sector, from just doing corporate social responsibility, which was mainly based on charity and philanthropy and obviously has its place and it's very important. But what I wanted to do was to see if we could shift our lens into using the mainstream business model for actually doing good and making impact. And by that, what I mean is, for example, how we buy our goods and services, how we do our procurement, how we spend public money in particular, but also private sector investment. Who do we employ? Very relevant for today's festival event. So thinking really carefully about our employment decisions and how in making those do we get the best talent into the sector, but also try and make a positive impact in some of the communities and for some of the individuals who find it really hard to get their first foot on the ladder, who perhaps don't have any connections with the industry and wouldn't necessarily consider it as a career choice. So our employment decisions are really important that we take them through that lens of maximising the positive impact. And the third area for me that's really rich to explore is when both companies and the public sector are making investment decisions. You know, and government makes investment decisions with billions of pounds of taxpayers' money. No such thing as government money, in my view, it's taxpayers' money. And therefore, making those investment decisions with a real eye on how they can make extra impact, as well as the goods and services that you're buying and the buildings that you're constructing. How in doing that can you make that extra impact? And impact investing now has actually taken off as a global movement around the world, which I'm absolutely delighted about. But it is, I suppose, a very innovative way of doing things. And The other thing I want to say is, by way of introduction, is that this conference is really about partnership working. So I want to talk to you about skills. I want to talk to you about the nuclear industry, civil and defence, because I think there'll be people, hopefully, from those sectors here. And for me, I've discovered the whole world of nuclear decommissioning. And for me, it's a really important mission for the country and for the world that we're able to do this massive task in a safe and secure way, but to do it also in a way that respects and tries to boost the opportunities in the communities where we operate. The Energy Act 2004 gives the Nuclear Decommissioning Agency a legislative requirement to consider at every stage of its work the impact on the communities where many of these nuclear plants were originally hosted. And for some of those areas, many of them, they're remote, some of them are rural. Many of them do have challenges for education, for skills, for jobs. And when you have a big nuclear plant in your area, it's great because it provides employment. But one of the downsides is it can create a kind of single strand economy, and it can also lead to a kind of dependency on the big company. And that's not necessarily a place where a really healthy and thriving economy wants to sit. So I think there are upsides from the great investment in nuclear power and in security and defence. But there are also some downsides, and I think we have to recognise both of those. I've been working on the three kind of buckets of social impact that I think that nuclear can help us achieve. The first one is, how do we buy our goods and services? You know, the NDA employs 15,000 people. It's got 17 sites. It spends £2.7 billion a year of taxpayers' money. And £1.6 billion of that money is actually in procurement and the supply chain. Now, that is a fantastic prize to have if we can get that procurement money, not just buying the goods and services that we need, constructing the buildings, the facilities, all of that, but at the same time, using that mainstream business model to make impact. And I have a word about this. I call it, I don't know if I've made it up, but it's actually a really important word to me, and it is about intentionality. And so whenever you're making your mainstream business decisions, I want people to put on their social value lens and view it in a way that, yes, I might need to buy this goods and services, but in the way that I do it, the contract that I design, the requirements for social value that I put into that contract, the tendering process, and then above all, the contract management process to make sure that what the tenderer has promised to do in terms of social value actually happens on the ground, and it's high quality and it's first rate. So using the procurement process is a really fantastic way of getting extra value from the money that you would spend anyway. So why wouldn't you do it? Now, to some extent, the nuclear industry, certainly up in places like Sellafield, have been a bit ahead of the game because of the legislative requirement to help the communities where we operate. But what the government has now done is kind of endorsed this, validated it, made it a mainstream activity, rather than something that just people who are passionate about it, like myself and Jamie Reid at Sellafield are. So now it is just becoming business as usual. It will take some time to embed and for people to understand it and get trained up and really feel comfortable at pushing the people who want to get contracts to do maximum social value. But I'm absolutely convinced now that this will come. There's a green paper out for consultation. There'll be legislation next year. The government have reviewed what's called the Treasury Green Book, which sets out how you can look at business cases and take into account impact. And they're now talking about social value for money, which is a fantastic concept. Everything used to just be about value for money. Now it's social value for money, social cost benefit analysis. So these are becoming new mainstream Treasury terms for social value, which is absolutely fantastic. So I'm feeling very enthusiastic about all of this, and I'm looking forward to seeing how we go forward. For example, I think there's a huge challenge around diversity and inclusion, and I would say diversity in all of its shapes and forms. It is about age, class, gender, but also diversity of thought and creativity. And I was really pushing with the nuclear people, not just to do STEM, which is absolutely essential, obviously, for the nation's economy as a whole, but also to have arts and creativity in there. And it's been really interesting that a lot of heavy industries that major on construction and engineering are now starting to bring art and design people into their workforce, because just of the different kind of ways of thinking, the ideas, the innovation that come from arts and culture and performance. And I would just urge organisations to be much more open and fluid to things that you didn't really think would necessarily be the way that the nuclear sector would operate. The other thing I wanted to talk about was apprenticeships. Apprenticeships are fantastic. I've always been an absolute champion, and in fact I'm a director of the Co-op group and I'm the apprentice champion on the board, so it is something I feel very passionately about. But I am a bit worried that in some of the procurement stuff we're doing, it all comes down to numbers. So it's 2 apprentices or 3 apprentices, and as long as you do that, it kind of ticks the box. Again, I want us to go deeper into this area. How many apprentices are we employing who've come from multi-generational workless households? How many of them come from the non-nuclear sector? Now, it's a lot easier to get into the nuclear sector if you've got friends and family who are already involved. What if you are what I used to call kids without connections? You don't know anybody. In my community in Salford, young people often didn't even know a joiner or a plasterer, let alone a nuclear worker or an accountant or a solicitor. So really making an effort to bring those people forward, I think, is very, very important. So I want us to be much more ambitious about our apprenticeship programmes, because if we're going to level up the economy and we're going to tackle inequality and inclusion, then we absolutely need that next generation coming forward. And it's not just about young people. Actually, in the Co-op, we've got some of our apprentices in our funeral business, for example, who are in their 50s, 60s, mature people with great interpersonal skills who are adding value to our organisation. And that brings me round to one of my other key targets here. This social value and impact agenda isn't just about doing good. It actually can drive business benefits, and that's why it's taken off globally as well as in this country. It's now got lots and lots of emerging evidence that if you do the right thing on procurement, on employment, on your investment decisions, it actually comes back to you in making your business more successful. You attract the best talent, you keep them for longer, you've got your own pipeline going. In terms of your innovation in the community and your investment in the community, you have a much stronger license to operate if the community can see that you are operating in a social value led way. And if I think about the GDF, that is dependent on getting the communities, not just permission, but active support for that facility going forwards. Now, what better way to get that? Not through traditional charity work, and some of that will happen, but actually in saying that in creating the GDF, this will be mainstream social impact on a different scale for that community. If we don't get a place for the GDF, then that will compromise the NDA's mission. I can't think of anything more important than doing that with intentionality and a social value lens on every business decision that we make. So there are huge benefits to be had. I encapsulate this really in my phrase that doing good is good business, and it's a circular economy. And it means if you invest in this now, actually your business, whether it's public or private sector, will prosper in the longer term. And now I want to say a word or two about partnerships and collaboration. In my role as Secretary of State for Communities and Regional Development, I absolutely fundamentally had this as a priority, because it's a bit trite now. It used to be our phrase that we achieve more together than we ever do alone, but it's absolutely true and remains true to this day. So if you can get local authorities aligned with business, you get the local economic partnerships in their plans, in their visions, in their convening power themselves across a whole range of communities coming together to look at where do we go next, then the things that you can achieve are absolutely amazing. If I look at the growth of green energy and clean energy, fabulous potential for the nuclear sector around all of that. We've all had our disappointments over new build, but we should wait and see. But the prospect of small modular reactors and a fleet of those being deployed across the country, the possibility of STEP and the fusion programme, fabulous new science, again, potential for global exports for UK PLC, but also great jobs and opportunities for the local communities where they operate. So all of that now coming forward with the imperative of net zero carbon by 2050. That concentrates government ministers' minds, I can tell you, about where they're going to get to. The Chancellor has now just issued a green bond, and that's going to be backed up by thousands of green jobs, new training for people in these industries. And if you look across over to Teesside, what's happening there with offshore wind, again, government just backed a new manufacturing facility for offshore turbine wind blades. Apparently we don't have much manufacturing facility. That's taking the place of what was a devastated steel industry that caused huge problems in the community when the steel industry went. But from that, those ashes, you know, a new industry is being built. And so, you know, I want the nuclear industry to be thinking in a similar way. How do we have this renaissance? Because it's clean energy. It's what the country needs. And we're going to need more and more power with electric vehicles. So absolutely pressing on all of that. So for industry to work with the local economic partnerships, to work with all the regional partners, all of the local authorities, because the local authorities now, they want to do all this. They've got responsibilities for their communities. And if they can work in partnership with industry on the procurement, on the employment side and on the investment side, then, you know, we're all lined up. And I've always found that if people are aligned, then, you know, they go faster, they achieve more together. And actually, they get more enjoyment and satisfaction out of doing that, sparking off each other, just as you will be doing for the rest of the day. So I think there are huge opportunities, whether it's wind, tidal power, new nuclear, SMRs, whatever. I think we've got to be, this is my final point really, and it's about being ambitious. And sometimes, you know, people are a bit shy and self-conscious about ambition. But I've always been ambitious, not for myself, but for my country and for my community. And I would urge every single one of you to think as big as you can, to aim as high as you can. Because one of the things that I was told when I was growing up in Salford, Mum and Dad left school at 14. We didn't have, you know, a lot of contacts and a lot of money. But I was told, if you work hard, the world's your oyster. You can do anything and you can be anything. And I think all of you today are doing exactly that. So thank you for inviting me.
It's working with the nuclear sectors, we've seen huge benefit. We've learned from the behaviours of the organisations, how those organisations work with their supply chain. We've been able to work on a regular basis with the types of individuals they need. And of course, we've seen the benefit for the students. There are now new courses, new curriculum, new opportunities that they can study, and gives them a real opportunity for a career in the industry that will lead to them being very successful. There is a wider supply chain of nuclear and opportunities for all types of businesses and for students in the National College of Nuclear. The Hinkley Point benefit has seen a real legacy with the development of new apprenticeships, new degrees, opportunities for young people who wouldn't have necessarily chosen that industry or engineering to go into careers that will see them flourish and be successful.
We have been working over the past few years with fifth generation worklessness, and Sizewell C offers our communities and families the opportunity to find solutions to some of their employment issues.
The low power station will be a source of skilled employment for a couple of generations to come, and will be the largest employer in Malden district. But what I really want to see in our region is local businesses coming together in order to collaborate on bidding for larger work packages in terms of those offered by Tier 1 contractors. I would also say that companies should start thinking not about the nuclear new build as an end in itself, but think about what capacity, what skills that you business would be able to deliver for other large construction projects, not just in Essex, but in other parts of the UK, possibly even the world, as a result of getting yourself bid fit. We really want to see Bradwell be maximising the local supply chain opportunities. But most importantly, what I would like to see is a better and more resilient business community based in Essex and better able to pivot in terms of identifying new business opportunities and being able to think outside the box. I firmly believe that a nuclear new build will be transformational for the Essex economy.
The biggest benefit for me is having the privilege of working on one of the largest engineering construction projects in the country and the first nuclear new build project since the 1990s. I'm hoping the current entry routes into the nuclear industry will support the company's recruitment strategy in developing and growing people who will be part of building a low carbon future. The biggest benefit for the organisation is we'll have technical tests and training courses and entry route pathways to employ people to support our resource strategy for the project.
Sizewell C has the potential to improve thousands of lives in Suffolk and East Anglia for the better. The importance of working early with hard-to-reach groups. Building a new nuclear power station has the potential to do huge amounts of good beyond tackling climate change, to do more social good. Working alongside two established charities in Suffolk, Inspire Suffolk and Access Community Trust, we are opening up access to the project. We're introducing taster sessions in skills that we and other developers will need. It's important to recognise the value of us going out to the community and not just expecting people to come to us. Sizewell C can be a catalyst for really positive change. And we want to demonstrate to local people that by working in different ways, we can open up access to good jobs and training and to attract a more diverse workforce.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining our panel session this morning. My name is Lynn Matthews. I work for EDF and I work on the socioeconomic side for Hinkley Point C, Sizewell C and Bradwell. So we have a fabulous panel this morning, and I just want to thank Hazel for her keynote, and hopefully the panel session should build on that. So with Hazel's session, we heard about some real practical illustrations of where partnering through industrial projects can deliver real social value and commercial business sense. So we want to build on that with our panel. Before I introduce the panel, or actually I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, could I just please encourage everybody to send in their questions? I see we've already got some coming in, so either send in your questions or vote for your favourite, so that we can make sure that the panel are addressing exactly what you'd like to ask this morning. So without further ado, I would like to start introducing the panel, and also ask each of them, as they introduce themselves, what social value means to them. So Roddy, can we start with you?
Yep, certainly. Morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. So thanks to everyone for that. Yes, I'm Roddy Miller. I'm currently Nuclear New Build Director of Doosan Babcock. I've served 20 years in the industry, working in projects and programs across petrochemical, pharmaceuticals, thermal power plant, but mostly in nuclear. In the UK, Europe and the Middle East. Doosan Babcock is a part of the MEH Alliance, which is at Hinkley Point C, helping EDF to install the piping, electrical systems and HVAC systems to the nuclear island and conventional island at the site. And we're also part of a team called the Sizewell C Consortium, which is here to develop the case for the project to go ahead from a supply chain perspective to government. To me, to answer the question, social value, to me, I like to keep things very simple, and it means to me that we do the right thing as companies and as an industry in everything that we do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Phil.
Thanks, Lynn, and morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Phil Adams. I'm the Head of Employment and Skills over at Devon County Council, and I'm also the lead on skills and employment over at the Heart of the South West Local Enterprise Partnership. I think for today, I'm partly here as I've been involved for around 10 years now. First working with the District Council, one of the hosts of Hinkley Point, and then working with the wider project through my new role across the entire peninsula in the southwest. Which has been an exciting journey from start to finish. For me, social value as a local authority, a member of staff and as part of a local enterprise partnership is all around harnessing those projects and harnessing the potential of some of the investment that's going in to make a demonstrable change to the lives of communities and families and individuals within our patch. And that's the sort of day job that we have. Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Phil. Hazel. Oh, Hazel, you're on mute.
I think people probably already heard enough from me, but for me, social value is about the long-term change that happens in communities that leads to better quality of life and well-being for the people who live there.
Great, thanks, Hazel. Andrew?
Thank you, Lynn. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Andrew Murdoch. I am Project Development Director. Work for CGN on the Bradwell B project. Obviously, Bradwell B is building on the great progress on Hinkley Point and Sizewell. We are CGN in partnership with EDF, supporting the development of those projects. Obviously, my focus on Bradwell B in the early stages of development. For me, social value. I think I would think of it in three ways, really. For a project like Bradwell, it's a 100-year project, really, in terms of its presence and impact in the community. We need to be part of the community and not just existing alongside the community. We need to listen. We have a responsibility to listen and understand what the community needs from the project. In terms of economic and social benefits, we need to maximise pound for pound the sort of value that we bring to society at large, inspiring businesses to develop, looking at not just the direct but the indirect benefits that can come from a significant investment such as this. And then for me, it's also about the individual stories that you get, the impact you have on people, the apprentice who builds a career into the construction industry and moves on to a longer term future, or the long-term opportunities you create for people within the operational entities as well. So yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Andy?
Thanks, Lynn. Good morning, everybody. Andy Brown, Director of Operations for the Engineering Construction Industry Training Board, and it's an absolute honour to be supporting this event today and a very important subject. The Engineering Construction Industry Training Board is a statutory organisation that's legally obliged to raise a training levy across a certain class of employer, and summarily that's the contractors that work within the engineering construction sector. I think social value for me personally, it's around legacy, it's around future proofing of the industry, but I think from an organisation perspective, it's really about driving that value from the redistributive industrial training levy. That means that we can really evaluate the value that is driven from the statute, and we work closely on Hinkley Point with the Alliance, but we work across the upstream oil and gas sector, downstream sector, renewables, and other energy producing and process industries to drive value out of the levy we raise. Thank you.
Thank you. And Stuart?
Morning everyone, I'm Stuart Rimmer, I'm the Principal and Chief Executive over at East Coast College, so it's a further and higher education college based in Lowestoft and Great Yarmouth. I'm struggling to probably beat anyone's definitions thus far, but I think I just echo that for me it's about transforming individuals, allowing them to open that potential that we know that we've got. That in turn transforms families, and then hopefully transforms communities at the same time. And we know we've got it right if we move beyond just talking about pound notes, but we really are talking about fundamentally how people's lives are better, and that long-term legacy piece is where I'm most interested, particularly in rural and coastal communities where I work.
Thank you. And Diane?
Morning everyone. I'm a board director on Britain's Energy Coast Business Cluster, and as part of that I currently lead the Invest in Cumbria Alliance project team, which we'll hopefully get a chance to talk about a little bit later. In my day job I talk social value all day. I work for KBR as part of the social impact team on PPP, which is a 20-year programme at Sellafield to deliver major projects. For me, social value, I do talk about it every day, so stopping and thinking about what it really means, it is about changing people's lives, but it's also about us delivering and measuring the things that really matter to people in an equal way to the way we currently measure money. So that's social value for me.
Great, thank you, Diane. Right, so I can see some questions are coming in. Please can I still encourage you to keep asking your questions and voting for your favourites. So if I can start off with, there are so many great but fragmented and uncoordinated social impact initiatives running at the moment. How can we move to a place where we can coordinate these efforts and make a more impactful collective effort? So I guess this could go to several of you on the panel. I mean, Phil, from a HPC point of view, there's been a lot of effort around social impact. Maybe we could kick off with you.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. Yeah, I think it is challenging. I think one of the benefits, but also one of the challenges around having a large NSIP project like Hinckley is the amount of different programs, different schemes, different strands that you have to coordinate. And having had first-hand experience of trying to align them all and make sure a community can understand them and people can take advantage of them, businesses and individuals, can be the biggest challenge. I mean, I think in an ideal world, we would have all employers working together. We would have all end users working together, and you would put it all into a single fund, but it's never going to be that simple. And actually, I think the way that we've dealt with it on the ground practically is we've created strong partnerships between the private sector, community partners and local stakeholders to make sure that we can marshal some of that activity. It takes a bit of time. It's part of the process. But as somebody's already said, you've got 100 years worth of activity, and almost international impact on some of these projects. That partnership working is part of the getting going piece. So I think it's really important to do that alignment, but I don't think in practice it's ever going to be possible to entirely get everybody on the same page. It would be brilliant if we could, but I think there's efforts, as Hazel's talked about in her original openings piece, around trying to get that alignment there.
Thanks, Phil. I mean, there's in terms of social mobility, opportunity areas, let's just take the triangle across, say, Suffolk, Somerset and Cumbria. Maybe this one's for Hazel, do you see a correlation and an opportunity on lessons learned in terms of your three buckets, your procurement, your social mobility and access area, and your idea around innovation? Do you see that there is an opportunity to share learnings and come up with some more national initiatives, or do you believe they should remain regional?
I don't think there's just an opportunity to share best practice. I think it's an imperative, because for me, one of the biggest concerns is there's so much going on now, because this has become slightly flavour of the month. Some of it is really good. Some of it, quite frankly, is not very good. And so I think that there's got to be some honesty in the system. There's got to be transparency where you get a great idea. And Diane's been really involved with the PPP, and her passion has been about a pre-apprenticeship programme. So getting young people to the point where they can actually have a chance of getting an apprenticeship. And she's promoted this internship scheme, which is absolutely amazing. I would like to see everybody across the country getting the people furthest from the labour market and really working with them one-to-one, bringing them through the system and seeing all of their talent. Now, if we can replicate that within the nuclear industry, within other industries, we'll actually be getting somewhere. And if we also have some kind of transparency and I suppose intellect around how we measure this stuff, I'm very worried that there's some systems of measurement out there actually which are frankly, again, not very good. They're measuring 2 of this and 3 of that, and it's all about numbers, and it's not about the change that we make. We should be measuring the change and the difference we make, as Diane said, to people's lives.
Thank you, Hazel. And maybe this one for Roddy. In terms of the supply chain getting together and operating in several different regions, how can you create a collective impact?
Yeah, that was actually the spark behind the Sizewell C consortium, Lynn. You know, it started off as a supply chain led entity working in partnership with the developer to push the case for the project itself, but it quickly became apparent as more and more members jumped on board with their support, up to the point where we're now over 200 member organisations. That represents over 100,000 employees UK-wide, most of that outside of the southeast of England. It became apparent to us that this is a great vehicle for us to push some of our targets in terms of diversity. You know, the nuclear sector deal shines a light on targets for women in nuclear and for BAME, for example. And we recognise that. And we've embedded that into the consortium vision to make our workforce more representative of the UK PLC as a whole. And as a supply chain entity, we're working in partnership with the developer to capitalise on this and to lead for once as a supply chain through the creation of some ideas like a common policy platform for working on the project. Developing the job service platform that's been developed at Hinckley, and giving opportunities to SMEs to reduce the barriers to entry, which by the way is not easy in the nuclear industry. So we believe that we can make a real impact by working together as a supply chain through projects such as Sizewell and follow-on projects by developing things like MOUs with the regions that will pledge support that is compatible with areas that the government cares about in its levelling up agenda, such as the North, such as Wales, such as the East of England. So we're working on a lot of these fronts at the moment to develop a plan between now and FID for the project, so that a lot of this is up and running ahead of the project happening, not once the project's been granted.
Thanks, Roddy. And in terms of, we heard in the Vox Pops as well that social partners are increasingly playing a big part. We had Julia Pipe particularly talking about some Sizewell C social partners. Andrew, could I come to you with Bradwell? You know, Bradwell's at very early stages, you know, earlier than some of these other huge projects. What's your view of social partners, and what are the early activities you're putting in place, or your thoughts around your strategy towards social value?
Thanks, Lynn. I mean, as you've pointed out, you know, we are at an early stage, and from a social value perspective, that's a real opportunity for us. You know, as the sort of third nuclear new build project, hopefully in the UK, and building on the experience from the decommissioning and other nuclear projects as well. There's a real opportunity to learn from those things which everyone is talking about now, particularly the things like the Sizewell C Consortium and the great work at Hinckley, the PPP up at Sellafield. And so, we're in a sort of learn and listen and stage at this point in time. We want to work with our sister projects and hear from the great experiences and lessons learned on other nuclear projects. I mean, in terms of building local partnerships, we want to do that early. We're starting early. So we're already engaging with key stakeholders such as the local enterprise partnership, the chambers of commerce, obviously the local authorities as well, so that we can understand the Essex supply chain issues and the skills needs. We've started initial discussions with education providers such as the Federation of Essex Colleges, for example, to understand how we can enrich and enhance the employment opportunities for local people. For me, the kind of partnership approach to engagement will build over time, and it's through that engagement we'll sort of start to think about the ambitious and creative options that we can build into the early development. I mean, supply chain for me is absolutely vital here, and for a client you need to work with the supply chain on how to realize these opportunities. It's obviously it's the supply chain that appoint the people through the different tiers, and it's the supply chain that will bring the economic development opportunities and the sort of indirect opportunities as well. So, obviously traditional procurement has been a barrier to that in the past. We need to look at how we can identify those partners early and bring their experience to bear locally, regionally, nationally, etc. So obviously, as we move forward, we'll be looking to proactively work with both the prospective supply chain and then with the local supply chain to ensure that they can be as ready as they can be for the project when it comes. And then, as I mentioned earlier, communities are key. We need to make sure we're building that long-term relationship with the community. We're listening carefully to the community views and specifically what the community needs are. There's a number of things we're doing at the moment to do that. We're already investing in a community fund, small numbers at the moment, but that will grow over time. Obviously, we're opening a local information office right on the high street in Malden so that people can come and talk to us and engage with us, because that's part of the problem. So obviously post-COVID, then as soon as we can open that, we will do so.
Thank you, Andrew. We're getting some questions in here around funding, particularly because it's all very well, I guess, having it's great innovative ideas and initiatives, but where does the money come from? And question has come in here around the LEPs. Oh, it's jumped up. Okay. So what are the panel's views on whether social value is best managed when funding is managed locally by the LEPs or through government centrally? I'm not sure who would like. Phil, go on then.
I would say this because I represent a LEP, but our experience is that community benefit is best driven out from the bottom up, working with businesses and with the local community. Government actually can play a key role in engaging in those partnerships, and we've engaged with BAYS and other departments in forming and shaping those funds and that impact. But when it's led by the business community and the community working together, that's where we've got the biggest bang for our buck in terms of the community impact.
Okay, great. Stuart, you wanted to add something?
Thanks. So I guess it's probably not an either or for me, and I think we could probably get confused in the debate if we, there's certain things that need to be done nationally because it's trying to respond to a national position. There are certain things that need to be done regionally. I love working with our LEP, and they've been hugely supportive in developing some of our energy skills capacity, particularly for the offshore renewable sector and sort of decommissioning, which hopefully then we'll start to see sort of sector jumping and happening. But there's also, the recent government white paper that starts to point towards chambers of commerce, some other employer-led organisations as well. So I don't think it's either or for me. It's speaking to one of the the earlier questions. There's it's good to create frameworks because that helps people navigate. But at the same time, I think we should also trust some organisations and trust some third sector organisations who spend all their lives doing social value to do the right things. And I think, you know, I'd put colleges in that bucket as well. So for me, I think that big frameworks are great, and we might need some national frameworks to help connect and knowledge transfer. But also let's see some of those like almost guerrilla social value in terms of in local communities.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. And there's real opportunity. I mean, Hazel talked in her keynote about partnering, and I think that's clearly coming through from all of you, the importance of the sector partnering with the community and actually really understanding the landscape, understanding the key priorities, and investing in terms of enriching and enhancing rather than just creating a load of new initiatives. And that could probably support funding going forward. Diane, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of observations because cost comes up quite a bit when it comes to social value and funding. The first thing for me is a lot of the social value that we can deliver is in doing business differently. If we change our processes, if we change how we work, we can deliver a huge amount of social value without cost, and we should never forget that. But then providing the place is taken into account, I don't really care where the funding comes from, in all honesty. If funding is needed, then let's find it. So on the cluster, our social value group ran a project which they started about 4 years ago. And initially it was crowd-funded by members, and it was about employer engagements in schools. So Chris will recognise this with the Business and Schools Collaboration Project. Initially crowd-funded by members, that then proved the case, and government funding came through to fund it right across Cumbria. So providing the place is taken into account, and you have partners from the various different sectors, frankly, I don't care where the funding comes from.
Chris, did you want to?
Yeah, thanks. And just a couple of things to add to that, if I may. I think Stuart's point's well made about the framework and the policy that needs to be created nationally, but it's the local agencies that know their communities best, and colleges like ours. We often work in some of the less glamorous and unseen side of life, you know. That's part of the job that we do. And we're not doing our job well if we don't understand our communities. So I think at the local level, we're in a privileged position to undertake matching exercises, market making, and that kind of part of social value, so that we understand locally who's at potential of being excluded, who's furthest from some of the opportunities that are around and about in the local community. And I'd be a strong advocate of saying, you know, do make sure that we're given the range of funding to do that locally, and trust us to do it, because we do know our industry and our communities locally, I would argue, better than anybody else.
Right, thank you. So widening access is something that seems to be coming up quite a lot, and has been mentioned a lot this morning within the panel, and allowing the access to those that may not either feel or normally have the opportunity to access these opportunities, or may not feel that they're right for it. The drive for developing more apprenticeships and creating a stronger infrastructure in terms of pipelines seems to be a real theme in terms of demonstrating social value. Stuart, you've done quite a bit of the college recently, and you've set up a potential consortium. Do you want to just share a bit about that?
Sure, thank you. So one of the things that recently we've done is we've brought together about 20 colleges and higher education providers nationally in an energy skills consortium. That's about really starting to understand how we can engage with each other around knowledge transfer, and hopefully in time we start to understand that You know, Chris in the Lakes is way above where we are in the east of England, and Hinkley Point has gone first, and I think it's about sort of creating that connectivity so that we don't do a number of things. Is that one, we can share expertise, knowledge, curriculum development, some of those real sort of kind of solving some of those nubby issues. The second is a recognition, I think, that there are a number of developers and constructors that are working in lots of different places. We kind of, just because I'm talking to them in Lowestoft doesn't mean to say that their whole world is Lowestoft. They also are working in Hull and Newcastle and Cumbria, and so speaking with a more collective voice seems really sensible at the moment. And then the other thing is around that we all scramble for assets, physical assets, and actually we need to make sure that we're not necessarily replicating or over-replicating specialist assets. So if there's a particular specialism that's been developed in Hinkley, a particular higher level skill, for example, then we wouldn't need to replicate that in the East of England necessarily. We just need to replicate the access to it. And I think that's then starts to sort of get us into a really interesting place. And already we you know, through some of these relationships, we've already started to develop. So, for example, I've got apprentices from Suffolk working via Roddy's company in Doosan down in Hinkley right now. So when hopefully in a few years, when the Sizewell project comes through, they'll come back as supervisors and leaders and higher technical professionals. And that's really going to start to create a conveyor of skill into the East of England, and that sort of then primes it a little bit. So it's early days for the National Energy Skills Consortium, but I think, you know, in time, hopefully it's a forum that we can really make work for us.
That's great, Stuart. And Andy, the iTech programme is part of all that. Did you want to maybe say a little thing about, you know, what's going on with that?
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. I think apprenticeships are absolutely, you know, the pipeline, the preferred pipeline for the majority of the trades that we need to support major builds, and we all know that that's a significant social investment. ECITB funds employers to take on apprentices every year, and we spend around about £6 million a year to support those employers. But of course, the issue around apprenticeships, and particularly contractors, is it's all about the economic view in the here and now as to whether or not they'll recruit apprentices, because they won't be able to carry a significant overhead if the order book's empty. So the partnership approach that we take when we can see that the economic situation means that apprenticeship intakes will be low is we work with a series of our providers and we create what we previously called the Introduction to Engineering Construction Programme, which is a 12-month pre-apprenticeship in inverted commas, but we now have broadened that to a 2-year scholarship, which is a deeper and more meaningful programme for learners. And we take on 130 last year, and we're aiming to do 150 this year. So it's a significant investment. The partnership element of that is it's all based around industry standards, which are developed in partnership with industry. So we know that the training program is quality assured, and it's delivered by a provider network that are approved to deliver training based on those standards and are quality assured by my organization. And there are spin-offs that directly help major projects. So we're using those standards, for example, for the pipeline of new entrants through the Engineering Construction Operative Bronze Programme and the future Silver pathways to bring people into Hinkley Point, and that will benefit the social elements of the local economy. But we're also using the same programme through the LEPs and through our provider network to deliver the government boot camp. So the partnership really supports that transferability because it's feeding into a number of different programs to bring pipelines of new entrants into industry.
So that's really interesting, and we've talked, there was mention at the start around legacy and sustainable effort. So a question here around how can we ensure that once these projects are up running and business as usual in the community, how do we maintain the social value that has been delivered through developing a workforce in the first place? Roddy, probably one for you.
I think there's a couple of aspects to this.
we need to look to the past for inspiration. It's not the first time we've had a nuclear industry in this country, so there's an existing generation fleet and there's the NDA estate that does lots of great work regarding social value. So that needs to be part of the mix. And then secondly, I get asked quite often around the subject of sticky jobs, so that the project is going to be in construction for a certain period of time and then it will move into operation, and what happens to all of those local businesses and local people after that. And I think that's where moving the opportunity onward to the next set of projects, the next programs, and giving that local community the opportunity to export its newfound capabilities to other parts of the country is key to that. And I think as suppliers that are UK wide, that the bigger suppliers need to help with that and need to help with the let's call it coaching and mentoring of smaller suppliers in the local area that can benefit from that.
Thanks, Roddy. Andy, you wanted to come in on that.
Yeah, thank you. For me, there are two key elements around securing this legacy. And one was mentioned already by Hazel this morning, and that's collaborative contracting strategies. We've got to get to a position where the supply chain margin is sustainable, because without that, they will not invest in their own skills and their own people, and therefore, there's a risk that we will lose the supply chain. We've done a lot of work in upstream oil and gas around collaborative behaviours, and we're currently developing a collaborative working agreement with other partners to try and create this a contracting strategy that supports multi-party agreements, but also the sustainability of the supply chain. The other element of legacy is transferability. We've got to focus on, we're a project orientated industry, and we need to build transferability across sectors as well as within sectors. And so having competence schemes that are based on industry standards that are developed through partnerships with industry is a key element to secure that transferability and building that legacy. It doesn't necessarily mean the legacy will be regionally based, but that's a symptom of our industry. But at least the social value those individuals will derive will be sustainable.
Right, thank you, Andy. From a decommissioning perspective, Hazel, we've talked here quite a bit about new build and developing a workforce. What, from an NDA perspective and social value perspective, how does that work with decommissioning? What's your thoughts?
Well, I don't think that it's particularly different. You've got major projects. You've got, as I said before, £1.6 billion being spent on procurement in the supply chain, and that's why it's such a fabulous opportunity. So I don't really see decommissioning as different from new build or other major construction projects. Many of the skills will be similar. There'll be some technical differences, but the point I really wanted to make was around legacy. Because the legacy that we should be leaving in these communities is that the people have changed. And I chair a small regeneration project voluntarily up in Whitehaven called Well Whitehaven. It's on one of the toughest estates in West Cumbria. A lot of the young people are incredibly challenged by health, by education, by lack of opportunities. And if you're poor, life is really boring. It can be a real challenge to get out of that poverty. And so the objectives we've set ourselves on Well Whitehaven are very simple, and it's to have healthier, happier people in that community. And that's the big legacy that you leave. I mean, you'll leave nuclear power plants, you'll leave great big construction projects, but if you're not changing the lives of the people in the process of what you do, then those legacies will come and go. The long-term lasting social impact is that people are more confident, that their families are thriving, that they're willing to give their time to local community organisations, that they look outwards rather than inwards. And you've built that sense of self-esteem and self-worth in these communities, and that is sometimes one of the hardest things to do. So for me, social value is a means to an end. It's not just an end in itself, and it has to be about changing lives for the long term and making some of these communities places where people want to live, they want to work, they want to bring up their families. They're vibrant and thriving. And, you know, I would say, and I'm sure Diane would support this, we have a way to go in some of the communities that we're working in. Don't underestimate the challenge. But if everybody works together and is, you know, doing it with the social value lens on and intentionality, then we will make some of that change. My worry is the hardest things to do are when deprivation is really embedded over several generations. So changing that mindset and opening people's minds, I think, is a crucial part of the social value agenda. And I hope, you know, I'm very optimistic that we are now doing that. But you've just got to keep asking yourselves the really tough questions. You know, am I reaching the people who wouldn't normally be on my radar? Am I?
Thanks, Hazel. You know? Yeah, that's right. And Phil, you wanted to come in there. I mean, you've got some really good examples of that as well. HPC.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to absolutely agree, and I think that's the key thing about that is making sure you harness this. So if I talk about the local example, really drill it down into some of the things that we've been doing. Bridgewater, the community that's nearest to Hinckley, had a lot of those social issues. It's one of the more deprived communities in the southwest. A lot of the work that's been going on over the last 5 years has been around that structural change, and absolutely that legacy change that Hazel's talking about, working with those furthest from the market to get them on site, linking them to the jobs brokerage, getting the college to increase its capacity and taking local individuals, local students, local mums, you know, into those programs and getting them into Hinckley related work. But it's not just about doing the projects. The project can't be the only thing. It's also about making sure there's that legacy impact in terms of those investments for the town. So yes, you end up with a nuclear power station, but you know, if you've visited Bridgewater, if you've been there, we've seen an expansion in retail, we've seen an expansion in community investment, we've seen skills investment, we've seen things that will be there for the next 50 to 100 years that will make and are making a real difference. And we're seeing deprivation levels and we're seeing some of those core indicators down. They're not perfect. It's always going to be struggles. But, you know, things like apprenticeships, things like traineeships and the work that we've been able to do with EDF and supply chain have started to make a real difference. The challenge, I think, as we get to the end of the project is keeping that going, using those assets. And I know that East is thinking about this at the moment, but there's a real opportunity for communities there.
Thanks, Phil. And Chris?
Yeah, just a quick one. To pull those together for me, it brings together two important bits, which are being active, not passive, and reactive around social value. So doing things demonstrably and upfront and planning for them, and then linking that to diversity. In our experience, the more successful you are with your approaches to diversity, the greater the propensity for a longer legacy and sustainability, just almost by definition, because more people have been embraced in social value and therefore have a greater chance of a longer legacy.
Yeah, Roddy?
Yeah, I was just thinking, if we step back for a second and look at the energy white paper and the challenge that we've got to get to net zero by 2050, it's an enormous task for this industry to respond to. So I'm highly confident that the number of projects and programs that young kids that are coming into this industry are going to have ahead of them is going to be fantastic. I think there's never been a better time to join the engineering construction industry and the nuclear industry than there has been now, in my opinion. So it's all ahead of us, and it's fantastic. It really is very exciting.
It certainly is, Roddy. So I'm going to go back to questions that are coming in. So you've all shared your experiences. We've been asked if some of you could actually share some real examples, real practical examples of social value in action. So just, you know, what's been happening. Diane mentioned earlier about internship, apprenticeship. Do you want to share what you were doing there?
Yeah, so one of the things that we identified was that sometimes an apprenticeship isn't the first step, and I think this this links in with something that Andy shared earlier about some of the programmes that they're doing as well. So we have worked with partners. I think it's really important that when it comes to social value, we have equal partners at the table who all bring the right pieces of the solution with them. So we've worked with Lakes College, so it's nice that Chris is on the call. We've worked with Inspira, who are a local social enterprise up here. We worked with the Job Centre. You know, there are pieces that businesses bring to the table in terms of solutions, but what I often see on social value is businesses feeling like they have to bring the whole solution, and then they become paralysed because it's too big a problem. So for me, really good examples of social value involve public sector, private sector and charitable sector working as equal partners. And that's very much what we've tried to do with the internship. So as Hazel said, we've tried to reach out to people and say, right, come on board and we will develop you while we employ you in a way that is similar to apprenticeships, but is very personalised. So apprenticeships tend to be a framework. If somebody comes onto an apprenticeship, they will do a standard set of things. On the PPP internship, what we're doing is personalising to each of those individuals to give them what they need to develop while they are employed with us. But as I say, having our partners on board with that has been absolutely essential to creating something to make a difference.
Thanks, Diane. And Andy, you wanted to contribute to that?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to give you an example, because we can look at this on an industry-wide level and talk about scholarships and apprenticeships, and but actually social impact is just as important to individuals. And we have a program running, an upskilling program for pipe fitters and riggers, and that was born out of one of the refinery sites where we have contractors. They have some semi-skilled labourers working on that site, and they were people that had potential, and the contractor wanted to grow that potential. So we tried to work, we developed the program with the contractor. We tried to work with the local provision. Local provision wasn't available. But exactly as Chris said earlier, you've got to persevere, and you've got to pick this up and run with it. And so we ended up developing the program further with a provider that was the other end of the country, and we supported these learners going the other end of the country to do a 6-week program. And these individuals are now on an MVQ program up to craft status level 3, and they've now got a full trade career ahead of them. And we replicate that program as often as we can when there's demand. So it's that micro element of social impact. Those individuals feel that their employer has invested in them. Those individuals know that the industry's looked after them, and they'll be somebody for the future that will return that investment.
Chris, can I come to you and then to Phil?
Yeah, very specific example of how this can work in practice at the individual level. So within the National College for Nuclear, we undertake quite a lot of community work to promote opportunities to people who might not consider nuclear to be their first point of call. So just to give you a very specific example, young lady who trained and worked in the beauty therapy sector and self-employed, started having a family, engaged with us, thinking about how do I get back into the workplace. We encouraged her to think of opportunities in nuclear, and 4 years later actually, has just graduated with a degree apprenticeship and is in a fantastic career path within project management and loving it. So, you know, it does work in practice, and I'm sure everybody on the panel has some specific examples like that, but it does work.
That's fantastic. Roddy, an example from you?
Yeah, thanks. So, this kind of the power of the collective of the Sizewell C consortium has been that when the opportunity came out from government to input to the Kickstart scheme, we took that on board, and we coordinated that through the membership. Now, the Kickstart scheme, for those that don't know, is an opportunity for placements to be made available for 16 to 24-year-old unemployed people that are struggling to get a start, and these placements will allow these people to get some job experience and help with their CV and mentoring while they're with the companies. Now, we put the request out to the consortium for support to that, and it's totaled, I think we've got about 35 individuals that we're going to take on through the consortium to the consortium member companies. Now, this is pre-contract. The Sizewell project hasn't started yet, but this is the kind of power of momentum that we're getting through engagement with companies at a collective level rather than individuals. So I think we're stronger together than we are as individual businesses in that respect.
Thanks, Roddy. And Phil?
Yeah, I mean, I think following on from what Roddy's just said, I mean, we've got a couple of examples of where the industries worked together with local people and made a real difference to people's lives. So, I mean, Lynn, and you know this because we use it a lot. The steel fixing apprenticeship that we did, where we recognised the need on site, working with the project, worked with the local college to develop the qual, found 16 candidates in the first round and multiple rounds after that, many of which are long-term unemployed from the hardest to reach areas. Some of them hadn't worked for years, and got them on site, got them trained. And we've ended up with a group of individuals there that have got a recognised qual. They've gone from being on long-term benefits to being higher rate taxpayers in 7 or 8 months. And they're now out not only as supervisors, you know, working their way through the industry, but on sites across the entire country, not just working on Hinckley, but working on civils projects across the entire infrastructure piece. So, you know, massive change in lifestyle for those families, massive benefit for local community, but a huge benefit in terms of the wider sector.
Yeah, great. It's a great example, Phil. Hazel, did you want to just add one other example?
Yeah, slightly provocative, really. Just a non-nuclear example. Up in West Cumbria, then the NDA and Sellafield have worked together and established something called the Buzz Station. Dan will know this really well. It is the most fabulous building. It's going to be full of small units for people to come who've got entrepreneurial ideas, young entrepreneurs. They're going to have mentors to bring on their business ideas and hopefully get them to market. But I love it particularly because it's beautiful. And in lots of places that are kind of dominated by industry, beauty isn't always something that springs to mind, first of all. But it's a serious point. I think it's really important that people's environment does have elements of arts and creativity and beauty. This will be the Buzz Station, non-nuclear, but actually what it will do is produce that next generation of entrepreneurs from the community and give them a fabulous example. And because it's digital, it's the first thing I've seen up there that isn't really dominated by nuclear. And I think, you know, the point I was making in my speech about having an economic dependency on the big organisation is actually quite damaging to economies. You do need to diversify the economy for the future, because not everybody will want to be in the nuclear industry. Fabulous industry, but we've had young people leaving the area because they want to go into media and arts and creativity. They want to work at Media City in Salford, you know, so we can't replicate that. But what we can do is provide some spaces for that different side of your personality that is attracted to arts and creativity, actually to have reign. And increasingly having a mix of people in your employment who think differently. It's part of the diversity and inclusion point about thinking differently, bringing solutions to problems in a way that wouldn't be traditional in the industry. I think, again, it's going to drive commercial success as well as doing, you know, the right thing for local people.
I mean, it's a great point, Hazel, isn't it? Because the ED&I agenda, diversity, inclusion, and actually changing the perspective of nuclear not just being what people may traditionally think their careers in nuclear are, but actually some of the digital, creative, innovative skills that people may have are very welcome in the nuclear industry, and it's a lot broader than people think. So yeah, a really good point. Moving across, we've had a real theme here around collaboration and working together, and I've had a question come in about SMEs, and that SMEs currently do some great work in the community and already exist in the community and are actually passionate about the area they live in, but they're struggling to potentially access larger contracts or collaborating together to give collective social value, and you know, the cost may outweigh the impact. And what's the panel's view on that area? Probably go to Phil on this initially.
I mean, I can talk about what we've done in Somerset and what we've done across the Hinckley project. It's an area which I think we all recognise straight away that there was a need for some work on, and we've actually put in place a supply chain programme working with those groups to bring those consortia together to provide some of that support and to try and fill some of the gaps, because it is that big step up in terms of quality, in terms of behaviours, to move into some of this new activity. But there's a huge benefit there, as we've talked about. The thing I would say is that there's a bit of bravery on both sides. The public sector and the private sector can work together to create the mechanisms and the support, and we can do enough. But you as a business and you as a supply chain and you as a potential supplier have to be ready for that journey and have to be committed to it. It's not quick, it's not easy, it comes with stumbling blocks. But I think it's partly about changing culture and partly about providing that support. And most areas, I think, when they've been working on these projects are working in that field, but it takes a bit of time to get things right. I would say we've had some fantastic examples locally of activity that started around the project and then become wider community projects, going to Hazel's point about not just being about nuclear. So if I talk about food and drink or transport or engineering projects, which started on servicing, but the first step on that was getting SMEs and charity organisations ready for the journey and getting them prepared for that change in mindset, really, about what you needed to do to be that supply chain.
Thanks, Phil. Diane.
Yeah, so one of the observations I often make is that smaller businesses automatically do social value in a great way, but don't always necessarily call it social value or recognise it as such. I think there's a piece where we can support them in terms of being able to use that for business benefit, which is a great thing. But if you look at some of the work we've done through the cluster, if you look at the Business and Schools Collaboration Project, that was all about making it as easy for a one-man band or a one-woman band to contribute to employer engagements in schools as for the bigger companies who tended to be the ones that were turning up because it was easier for them. If you look at what we're doing with the Invest in Cumbria Alliance, that's about getting the voice of those smaller businesses in. But I think there is a piece around the bigger projects being able to enable the smaller businesses, as has just been said, about being able to provide the right environment for them. There's a place for us to do that as bigger projects or as clusters. Thanks, Diane. And Stuart?
Thank you. Three very brief points around SMEs, and to echo Diane's as the first one, that the moment a local small SME takes on an apprentice or creates a new job, they're automatically doing social value and perhaps giving more credit for that than we perhaps normally do, because they're bringing on a young person or an adult, giving them a set of skills. That automatically will trickle into broader life. The second is probably a slight downside, is that we need to be careful around in big projects around displacement. So lots of the SMEs, particularly if you get to the construction sector, is we're going to see a huge amount of displacement as you get big projects coming into region. So there's roles for colleges and the wider kind of business structures to wrap around SMEs to make sure that we can backfill some of those skills as a project starts to happen. And the third is then, I guess, supply chain readiness to join it. And we've already started in the east of England now to work on that with SMEs, because it's like the phrase, isn't it? When's the best time to plant a tree? And the answer is yesterday. And the second best time to plant a tree is today. And so even, we sometimes think about nuclear new build is it's going to come like a spaceship and just land neatly packaged. And it's not. It's, people in regions have been working on this for a decade, and we're ramping up those kind of readiness skills now so that people can navigate getting into supply chains if they want to, or they can navigate the legacy of what the supply chain might leave behind.
Yeah, really, really good point. Chris, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just three quick ones. The success we've had in this is make things less mysterious, make them less difficult to access, and make them less burdensome to engage in. and know your market. SMEs have a big job keeping the show on the road. They don't want those 3 dimensions to be even harder. So that's where we've seen success.
But yeah, and what this all leads on to as well, and I have got a few questions coming through on it, is how we actually measure social impact. So I've got a question here. It's difficult to measure value. Has anybody got some good examples? And I mean, just then you talked about maybe some SMEs out there doing some great stuff, partnering with the community, but maybe not packaging it as social value. So it'd be great to sort of get the views of the panel on that. I mean, Andrew, can I come to you? Have you got any thoughts around, you know, setting out on your project and how you're going to measure the journey of social value?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really great question, isn't it? Look, from my perspective, I think this is where it comes down to listening. You know, we first, before we set out on it, we want to understand what the objective is. You know, and if that's something that we can establish as a sort of partnership between you know, client, supply chain, you know, public sector bodies, then we can set some indicators that we can measure. I mean, if we try and look at it retrospectively, we can always find the sort of stories that I've described. What we need to do is look at that objectively, because you can always find positives, and positives are all good, but we've got to look at it in the round as to whether we achieved what we set out to achieve and whether we set the bar high enough. So yeah, that's not a non-specific answer, but again, for me, that's where, you know, it's kind of reflective of where we are as a project, but of the discussion, which is actually the fact that we all need to work together to identify what we need to achieve and then go out and work out how we do it and work together to do it.
Yeah, that's really useful from a government point of view. What's so Hazel Social Value Act and the you know, the pressure that's going to be put on organisations to prove that they're delivering against that. What's your views on that?
Yeah, Social Value Act originally, 12 years ago, was a private member's bill, and we've been pressing government ever since to strengthen the Act, which they've now done with Policy Procurement Note 0620. Never thought I'd get excited about policy procurement notes, but I'm very excited. I now believe procurement officials and accountants can change the world, probably more than politicians. But we've now got a legislative framework, and from next year we'll actually have legislation around all of this. I just say 2 things. The things that have changed is, for me, you should start off by asking the public what they think is important and doing that in a proper way. You then translate that into the questions that you ask in your contract for the kind of social value that you're looking for. So you know that the social value you're going to get reflects the people who are paying for it, reflects their priorities in the community. So you've got a really strong link. You then look at putting at least 10% in the award criteria for your contracts, at least 10%. That is a minimum from the government, and they're looking to the best organisations to really raise the bar on that. So in the award criteria, you know, that is a really important part of what you do. Then you move it through into contract management. You make absolutely sure that you're getting what they said they were going to do, and you hold their feet to the fire in those terms. So every bit of the contracting process, and probably the most important thing, is right at the beginning, the business case and the contract design. So if your social impact people are working hand in glove with your procurement experts, you've got a fabulous combination there. They're not pulling apart, they're not against each other, they're actually collaborating on all of this. In terms of measurement, I think you should align with the Green Book, the Treasury Green Book. It's the best academic underpinnings, it's adopted around the world, it's a global set of measurements, and it's all about simple things. It's about quality of life, it's about well-being. You can measure those things. We've been doing it for 20, 30 years, and now we're doing it much better. Please do not go for systems which are mechanistic, which are 2 of this and 3 of that and 4 of the other. Measure the change that you make, and it can be done. Even for SMEs, because you can help SMEs with all of this by the bigger partners helping them to develop a really good system too.
Thanks, Hazel. So we are coming to the close of this session. We've heard some really, really great insights into how the sector is addressing social value. We appreciate there's still a way to go, but it really appears that it's moving in the right direction. Measurement is key. Understanding when you're doing the right thing, as we heard earlier, doing the right thing is really important, and that's what it's all about. But understanding when you're doing the right thing and when you're striking the right balance between the community need and priority and the regional need and the project's commercial need. When you hit that sweet spot, I think that's when we're really going to deliver the right social value. So before we close, I just want to absolutely thank our panel. Been really brilliant, great insights, great examples. But before I let you go, could I just go round and from each of you just have a takeaway, whether it be a bit of advice, a call to action, something you've taken from today that you found particularly useful from each of you, just to leave the audience with. So if I start on the top of my screen, Andrew.
Thank you. Look, from my perspective, it's been really good to see the different perspectives coming across in the discussion. For me, to deliver social value, it can't all be down to the client. What we need to, the client can create a vision for their project, but we've talked about this being pan sector, pan project, pan location, pan region. What we need is the private and public sector to work together. It's a push-pull conversation, and this has been a really encouraging discussion to see how that is already shaping itself, that we can then draw on for Bradwell.
Thanks, Andrew. Roddy.
Yeah, I would echo that, and I would add that, as an industry in the past, we've been quite fragmented. We've had lots of debate and infighting about technology types and which projects should happen when, and on all sorts of stuff. And I think we've got an opportunity now for the first time in a long time to really coalesce around this theme in particular and move forward as an industry and really take the opportunities that are ahead of us with the energy white paper that we've received recently. So thank you very much enjoyed it.
Thanks, Roddy. Phil?
I think I would echo what's just been said. I suppose for us specifically with a live project, I think it's building on some of the discussion that we've had today and looking at how we can make the legacy strategy that we've already got play into some of those themes and those wider projects that are now coming through. I mean, in some ways, it's great not to be on our own, and some of those real projects starting to come through. I think the key thing for us is how do we build that and how do we make those links?
Thanks, Phil. Chris?
Yeah, thank you. A key dimension for me is about diversity and being active in what we do with diversity. So removing barriers, which are sometimes tangible and intangible, and widening access are absolutely core, I think, to the notion of social value and enhancing the quality of life for more people.
Thank you. Hazel?
I've absolutely loved the commitment and energy and optimism that's been around the panel and in the audience for all of this. When I did the act, sometimes I thought I'd made all of this up, but clearly it's got some traction. And I think my final message is, when we see that doing good is good business, and we have this circular economic model, and we've moved from traditional corporate social responsibility, which will always have a role, but we've moved from that to using our mainstream business model to make impact and to do good, then I'll know, when I've long gone, that this will still be happening because it'll be just what we do. When it's not special anymore, then I'll know that we've really, crossed that barrier. And why wouldn't we do it? It's just what we do.
Thanks, Hazel. Andy?
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. Very stimulating discussion and morning, and thanks for letting me be part of it. I'm going to be slightly controversial. And while I acknowledge that to maximize the benefits of social partnerships, the collaboration and the coordination as far and as wide as you can is obviously key, I would say don't be scared of fragmentation. If you've got something that can bring some social benefit, and it's a small partnership, or it's niche, or don't be scared of trying to eat the whole elephant, because you'll be scared into inaction. As long as you've got early engagement with those partners and you've got alignment around those benefits, then you can communicate those more widely to get more coordination once you've done something. So don't let the risk of fragmentation stop you doing something.
Thanks, Andy. Diane?
Yeah, great conversations this morning. I think for me, I'm coming out of this really excited about what the nuclear sector as a whole could bring in terms of social value to the UK taxpayer. And it's not about decommissioning versus new build, it's about the whole sector and the value that we can bring together. So very excited about that.
Thanks, Diane. And last of all, Stuart.
Well, as a simple college principal in the east of England, I like a plan. So while I've been talking, I've scribbled a 4-part plan, which is that we need to do proactive engagement. Second, we need to align to some very well defined and understood sort of shared purpose. The third one is we do need to collaborate, but aiming to enhance, not always create new, because that can be distractive if nothing else. And then the fourth is just get on with it, because it's vital work, and occasionally we can lose ourselves in metrics and highfalutin thinking, but actually let's just get on with some stuff, you know.
Great, thanks, Stuart. And just want to say thanks to all the panel and everybody out in the audience for joining us, and let's just go out there as a sector, work together and make this business as usual. So thank you. Thanks all.